But in the 1960s, something happened. The special interests began to try to enter the political arena to press for their demands. So who were the special interests? Women, minorities, young people, old people, farmers, working people, in other words, the population. And they're not supposed to press their demands. They're supposed to be sitting quietly and obedient while the intelligent minority run things in everyone's interest. There was one group omitted in their lament, the corporate sector, and that's because they're not a special interest. They express what's called the national interest, so therefore we can't touch them. And like the far right, the liberal scholars just take it for granted that the extraordinary power of the corporate institutions is under control of the state and other institutions. That's just the natural order, so there's no point mentioning it. You don't mention the fact that we breathe air. And a primary concern of the trilateral scholars was the failures of what they called the institutions responsible for the indoctrination of the young. Their term, not mine. That's the schools, the universities, the churches. They're not indoctrinating the young properly. That's why we have these uprisings in the streets and the efforts of the special interests to press their demands in the political arena. So in general, they said we have to have more moderation in democracy if it's to be preserved and the national interest is to be protected. And crucially, we must have more successful indoctrination of the young. Well, at that point, the current phase of the assault on the public education system takes off. And these concerns expressed at both ends of the ideological spectrum, they have led to vigorous action to restore order and indoctrination. One consequence is the assault on public education, which takes many forms. I'll just give a couple illustrations. About a year ago, I happened to be giving talks in Mexico at the National University, UNAM. Very good university. It's hard to get in, but it's free. There was an attempt to raise tuition about 10 years ago. It led to a national student strike. It practically closed the country down, and the government backed off. In fact, one of the administration buildings on the campus is still occupied. It's kind of a community center. So no tuition. It doesn't have the wealth and salaries of an American university, but it's quite a high-class university. Very high standards, good work, so on, but free. In the city, in Mexico City, there was a leftist mayor, Lopez Obrador. He established a university in the city, which is not only free, but open admissions. So anybody can go. If people aren't ready, they get compensatory training. I taught there too. It's quite impressive. Also high standards, good achievements, good faculty, dedicated faculty. So that's Mexico, poor country. It happened that from Mexico, I went on to California, the Bay Area, Berkeley. That's the richest place in the world outside of maybe, Qatar. They're destroying the greatest public education system in the world, systematically destroying it, failure by design. The public education system in California, which is really, the jewel of the system, and in fact better than anything in the world, it's changing. It's now the major universities are being pretty much privatized for the rich. They're becoming like Ivy League colleges. And for the rest of the system, it's being slowly modified to technical training for the rest. And that's happening across the country. By now, in most states, tuition covers more than half of the costs for the state colleges. Pretty soon, only the community colleges will be publicly financed under current tendencies, and even they are under attack. So analysts agree, I'm quoting, that the era of affordable four-year public universities, heavily subsidized by the state, may be over. And there are similar developments in the private universities where the costs are just out of sight. That's a very important way to implement the indoctrination of the young. Students come out of college in a debt trap. They don't have many options. And the debt trap is now approaching $1 trillion, beyond credit card debt. And it's an exceptionally punishing kind of debt. Like most debt, you can get out of in unpleasant ways. You can escape through bankruptcy. Can't do that here. There's no expiration date on the debt. Collectors can garnish your wages for the rest of your life. Social Security, unemployment benefits, forever. You're trapped. For the students, that's a very effective trap for life. It does sharply cut down options. and particularly when employment opportunities are weak. Actually, the basic idea was explained by one of the trustees of the New York State University system. He said, there's been a shift from the belief that we as a nation benefit from higher education to a belief that it's the people who are receiving the education who primarily benefit, so they should foot the bill. And that's the new spirit of the age again. Actually, that belief is not among the population, it's among the principal architects of policy, and it's always been their belief. But now they feel in a position to implement it under the rising assault. Well, as usual, the main victims are the most vulnerable. In this respect, it's quite similar to subprime lending, which went after the poorest, the most vulnerable. And there's an educational analog to that. It's called for-profit colleges, which are mostly scams. They seem to offer opportunities. But when you take a closer look, say, just take debt figures, turns out that about 96% of the people, they're mostly poorer people, about 96% are in debt, and within 15 years, it's about 40% default. So they're not only trapped, they're robbed. And the kind of education they get isn't much either. Well, the Mexico-California comparison illustrates a crucial point. The reasons for the conscious destruction of the greatest public education system in the world, the reasons are not economic. Mexico is a poor country, we're a rich country. And there are many other cases, including rich societies, like, say, Germany or Finland, which ranks highest in educational achievement in the world. It's free. Actually, post-war U.S. experience is another example. In the post-Second World period, there was a program, the GI Bill, which enabled a huge number of people who would never have been able to go to college at public expense. And it was very rewarding for them, and it was also extremely beneficial to the country. In fact, that's a large part of the reason for the golden age, economic golden age. So once again, like austerity under recession, the policy of closing this off makes absolutely no economic sense, but it is a good technique of class warfare. Not economic, but not necessary, but a technique of indoctrination and control, and in that regard, it's quite valuable. Well, in parallel to all of this, there's a process of corporatization of the universities going on. There's a huge increase over the past 30 years, 35 years, huge increase in highly paid administrative staff. Payment is way beyond the level of anything except maybe football coaches. Increasingly, they're professional administrators. In earlier days, administration, which wasn't much of a big deal, was just carried out by faculty on temporary leave or something. Now it's professional administrators, very high paid, carrying with them the corporate culture. There's a very good study of the process by a well-known sociologist, Benjamin Ginsberg. It's called The Fall of the Faculty, the Rise of the All-Administrative University and Why It Matters. And one effect is to introduce the corporate culture into the universities. That has many manifestations. One of them is a drive for what's called efficiency, which is an interesting concept. It's not an economic concept, though it's called that. It's really an ideological concept. And, we all know it. Now, so suppose you call a bank or an airline or any other institution, complain that something was wrong or get some information or whatever it may be. You know what happens. You call them up, you get a recorded message. The recorded message tells you, we love your business, we love you, hang on. And you hang on while this message is repeated every couple of minutes, and you listen to some music, and finally at the end of it all you get some kind of a menu which is totally incomprehensible and doesn't have the options you want. And finally, if you wait long enough, you may get a human being. I'm sure you've all been through this. Well, for the business, this increases efficiency. Their costs are lower. And for ideological reasons, that's all that's counted. For the users, it's very costly. I mean, you're wasting your time, that's money, you're wasting your energy, all that's costly. But that's not counted. And those costs are multiplied across the population, which means they can be quite huge. But it's called efficiency. And it's the same when you go to the universities. So in the universities, efficiency means you reduce the proportion of faculty to students. You have faculty replaced by cheap labor, temps, just like in business. Easily replaceable temporary labor, graduate students, adjuncts, easily exploitable. You don't have to pay them much, and they can't ask for their rights. They're going to be out anyway. It's good for the bottom line, for the professional business administrators who are running the colleges. There's also a harm, namely to the students, but you don't count that. That's part of the ideological character of estimating costs. Another process is eliminate programs that are too expensive. In fact, you may have seen an interesting discussion of this in the New York Times a couple days ago. Now, they pointed out that state colleges around the country are eliminating programs in engineering, computer science, and nursing, which happen to be exactly the fields where there are job opportunities, where labor is needed, but they're expensive. So by good corporate logic, you eliminate the programs that the society needs and the people need because they can get jobs, but they cost too much, so eliminate them, and bottom line looks better. Good corporate logic. Well, you go down to K to 12, and it's more or less similar. The main main part of the assault is just defunding. If you want to privatize something and destroy it, the standard method is first defund it, so it doesn't work. Then people get upset about it, and they accept privatization. So, for example, when Margaret Thatcher wanted to destroy the railroad system in England, she first defunded it. Didn't work. People have to wait too long. Trains get stuck. Finally, they said, let's privatize it. They privatize it. It turns into a total disaster. Now they had to renationalize it to get it to function at a much lower level. Now that's familiar. And that's what's happening with the schools. They're defunded, so they don't work. So people say, okay, let's have a private school or a charter school or anything just to get us out of this mess, which of course not as an economic necessity or any other kind. Also just plain dumbing down the schools. I mean, there are there's debates that go back to the Enlightenment about what education ought to be. During the Enlightenment, there was kind of evocative imagery which contrasted different approaches to education. One image is education as being like a vessel into which you pour water. And as you all know, it's a pretty leaky vessel. Every one of us has been to school, has gone through this, and you memorize something for an exam, and it all leaks out the next day. You weren't interested in it, you didn't pay any attention. A week later, you can't remember what the subject was. So that's one image. The other image that was used was that teaching ought to be like laying out a string along which the student can progress in his or her own way, discovering rather than just memorizing. So there's some structure, like there's topics that you want to cover, but design them in a way so that the process of going through, of gaining the understanding and information is one of a creative individual activity in cooperation with others often. Well, that's the Enlightenment idea. The pouring water ideal has a name now. It's called No Child Left Behind, or Race to the Top, which is exactly what it is. It kills interest, it deadens the students, but it makes them more passive and obedient and not too much trouble. At least that's the idea. And it can be done. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but they're very good models where it's achieved. I'll give you one model that just happened to be discussed in the journal Science, the main journal of the American Association for Advancement of Science. It just had a series of editorials by its editor on the destruction of science education in the country through No Child Left Behind type measures from kindergarten to university. So get the kids to memorize something that they don't understand and don't care about, like the periodic table or the enzymes that metabolize something, and kind of memorize it and write it down. You go on to the next thing. No joy of discovery, no invention, no conception of why anybody should do this ridiculous, boring thing. But it does, you get past the exam, and if the teacher's salaries, let's say, or survival is dependent on this, they don't have any choices either, not many at least. Well, that's one way to do it. And the same series of articles does suggest alternatives. It was not necessary to suggest alternatives at the university level because they're actually done. So at a place like MIT, for example, lectures aren't intended to be poured into a vessel. In fact, the standard doctrine is it doesn't matter what you cover in the course, it matters what you discover. And you discover it in your own way, and you learn how to discover. The scientists couldn't survive if that wasn't pursued, at least at elite institutions. So it is. But you can do it down to the kindergarten level. And in fact, the editor, Bruce Alberts, discusses a kindergarten program, which he suggests as a model. It's for 5-year-old kids. It's a program where the kids in a class where each kid was given a small dish which had in it pebbles, shells, and seeds. And they were supposed to figure out which ones are the seeds. And so the first thing they did was have a scientific conference, as they called it. Kids got together and thought of various ways in which you could test to see which were the seeds, and they tried some of them, they didn't work. They tried others, they worked better. They exchanged ideas, improved them. Finally, they got to the point where they had figured out what the seeds were. And the next step was to give them all magnifying glasses and crack the seeds so they could look inside and find the embryo, which was the source of the energy that makes the seed grow. Okay, those kids learned something, not only about seeds, but about discovery, about how to go on to the next task, and why it's fun to do so and important to do so. Now, that can be done. Any of you who have been teachers know way more than I can say about this. Well, it could be done at any level, but it has a defect. It empowers the teachers instead of humiliating them, which is very important, and it enriches the lives of students and prepares them for creative, independent lives, not passive obedience. Well, all of this is more failure by design. And again, the word design is quite crucial. There are alternatives. There are successful models in our own history, elsewhere. We should be able to progress well beyond those models, but only by dedicated struggle, not passive acquiescence while all of this goes on before our eyes. Thanks.